Dun, dun, dun. Just joking. Hey, folks, this is the Alternative Amanda Show in partnership with NAS Radio. This is my debut episode with NAS Radio, and it's really exciting to be able to talk to my fellow Junubin brothers and sisters. Hopefully, you're millennial or younger. If you're not a millennial, it's unlikely this show will appeal much to you, but one is open to being surprised by these things. Anywho, back to my millennial and younger folk. I'm really excited to be able to share the joy of what it is to be Junubin. So I'm going to use this opportunity, my debut episode with NAS Radio, to just talk about the plethora of things that we have to celebrate about being Junubin. And so I'm going to go with my top 3 things about being Junubin. Number 1, I love that we are the newest country on the planet. And that's really important because that attests to the legacy of our fighting power. We are a remarkable group of various peoples in that we were able to defy the odds and actually legitimately have our own place on the global stage as a sovereign state. So that would have to be my one of my top 3 things about why I love being South Sudanese. The second thing I love most about being South Sudanese is just how hospitable we are. We are an amazingly generous group of peoples on the northeast/east end of the African continent, and it just gives me so much joy when I'm around other Junubin, just how giving and generous and open they are just generally as people. And then my third is I just think we are a ravishingly ferocious fighter people. And I say that in the fact that wherever you find us on this planet, whether we are in East Africa, back home, or in the West, we triumph over adversity. And that's not to say that we don't have a lot of issues in our various diasporan communities, but what I think is really beautiful about our people is the fact that we transcend many of those difficulties to have gem moments in our brilliance. And I think it's I don't know, like, for me, the hardest thing I think growing up in the diaspora in the UK was that you long for these familial connections that you hear about, but you never really get to touch or see unless you actually take a trip back to the motherland. So oftentimes we're separated. But what I think is really beautiful about our story is that we find connections in other ways. So I think that we in our various refugee asylum seeker situations that we found ourselves in various different parts of the world outside of South Sudan, many of us have managed to make a decent life for ourselves despite the difficulty that we face. And when I say a decent life, that I know that will vary from context to context, and some people may not feel like they're necessarily in that place, but what I'm here to tell you is you definitely are. You manage to breathe air, eat food, and have a shelter over your head and not fear grievous bodily harm at any juncture that you cross as a normal state of being, but you are comfortable in the fact that you are in a relatively safe situation. And I know that doesn't necessarily mean that's everybody. Sometimes we live in parts of the world where in the cities that we're from, we don't necessarily have access to certain privileges like other people do. But again, we manage to transcend those and make good of sometimes quite difficult situations. So I'm here to say kudos to all of you. I find you all a testament to the fact that we were built for better things. So yeah, those would be my top 3. The fact that we are the newest country on the earth, so we carved out a niche for ourselves. And yeah, that like I said, that would be my top 1. And then obviously the fact that the third one was our ferocious fighting capabilities. And so I'm pointing out those 2 particularly because I just feel like they resonate with me a lot. So so in this episode, I'd like to talk a bit about myself, what I am. I am currently a 30-year-old woman. That will change at some point during 2021. Dun, dun, dun. But I'm a 30-year-old woman. I grew up in the UK. I was born in East Africa, and I came here when I was 4 months old with my parents, and I lived in London. And so my exposure to the South Sudanese community was the London South Sudanese community of the 90s, noughties and 10s. So that's my background. If you are in the USA, if you're in Australia, if you're in East Africa, I don't know how much of my experience you will or won't relate to, but I imagine that we would have similarities and then places of disparity. So definitely hit me up on my socials to talk to me about your experiences. I'm really curious to hear what it was like to be junubi in Australia, junubi in the USA, junubi in East Africa. Even though I've got friends from East Africa, Australia and the USA, it would be good to hear other accounts and see what it's like to be junubi in a different part of the world. Oh my gosh. So growing up junubi in London, it's strange because we were always, in my house, because we were staunch separatists, you were always Southern Sudanese. So everybody, they would be, where do you come from? And I'm like, Southern Sudan. And I remember once I was in sixth form, which is, if you're in the UK, that's the period where you leave secondary school and you go to the 2-year period, or those years before you go to university. So I was in sixth form. And some girl was like, where are you from? And I was like, I'm Southern Sudanese. And she was like, so you're Sudanese? And I was like, yeah, I'm Southern Sudanese. She's like, so you're Sudanese? And I'm like, yeah, I'm Southern Sudanese. She's like, what's the difference? I'm like, there's a big difference. There's a whole war going on as to why we are not just Sudanese. So that's how separatist we were in my household. Like, we had to preface every time we said Sudan with a Southern. And I'm quite content with that, because fortunately we ended up getting South Sudan. So I think that was a good thing for us. So I grew up in that sort of household, and with that sort of commitment to the idea of South Sudan. And one thing that I think we can all probably sympathize with, most times out of 10, obviously not all of us have this phenotype, but most times out of 10, we were always like the darkest individuals in our friendship groups, generally speaking. Some of us weren't. I understand that. I am not sitting there and ousting, but you were related to people who were. So, I mean, this is a common, phenomena. And it was so interesting to me. Like, obviously, if you grow up in the West, I don't know how my East African brothers and sisters would view it, but when you grow up in the West, like, especially in London, in the noughties, like, there was this term called blick, and they'd always like talk about how dark-skinned people this is, and and the strangest thing to me, growing up being South Sudanese and having this like affinity to being South Sudanese, like we were fighting for our liberation and all of this stuff, and I just couldn't fix this image of like feeble, basic, good for nothing darkies off the east end of Africa. I just couldn't fix that in my head. Like this idea that other people wanted to project onto me as a South Sudanese woman, I just couldn't get with it, because every time I'd go to like South Sudanese parties when I was a kid, I'd see these really dark, stunning women, and I didn't understand what this idea of somehow being dark skinned somehow disqualified us from being brilliant and stunning and all of these things. So even though it didn't necessarily like resonate in my core, it definitely affected the way I oriented my experience in my teens. So that was difficult. If any of you guys can relate to that struggle, please hit me up on the socials. Definitely here to hear your stories and maybe feature some of them as well on this show. But so that's what it was like. But one thing that I really I'm grateful for about that experience is the fact that who cares? Are we not lit all on our own? I love the fact that we have a distinct look. I love the fact that we are particularly beautiful people. Yes, I said it. I don't care. Come for me, Nat. I don't care. South Sudanese people are some of the most beautiful people I've seen on the face of the earth, and I don't care what anybody says. I'm allowed to be biased. Anywho, so so growing up kind of being able to split the pessimism and the negativity of people who didn't know about what it meant to be South Sudanese. And when I say pessimism, I mean that in relation to people who didn't understand the significance of being a Southern Sudanese person, and then more importantly, the struggle and the necessity for us to break away and become our own country. So breaking away from that and definitely carving out an identity for myself where I felt very empowered to come from a group of people that since time immemorial fought for our independence. I mean, we were fighting for the independence of South Sudan before Sudan became independent, and I think that's pretty cool. So yeah, this is me just telling all of you, regardless of what tribe you are, we are phenomenally brilliant, and that can be attested. We have brilliance spread across every tribe that we have in South Sudan, and I think it's sad that of late we don't tell those stories of various faces of South Sudan, but hopefully NAS Radio will begin to document the brilliance of what it means to be South Sudanese and why it is we are so privileged to be able to hold that title against ourselves. So yeah, that was a part of the struggle. I'm also one of those weird people that thinks it's okay to combine the intellectual with the creative. Oh my gosh, what did I just do? Oh my gosh, I'm joking. But no, it's true. So I am a law graduate, poet, who quit acting at 24. And kind of used to sing as well. I was one of those people that didn't believe in limitations, and I am encouraging every junubi out there listening to me, don't believe in them either. So my parents were quite keen on making sure that we explored various different creative avenues that we felt would be reasonable to express ourselves. And so when I was a kid, singing, dancing and acting. So my dad would take us to African dance classes, and then we would go to choir, drama club. We would act in, and when I say we, I have a twin. Dun, dun, dun. I know Amanda has a twin. Like, what? Oh my gosh. I know. I have a twin. No, she's not like me, so there's not another one. But I'm just saying, I do have a twin. Anywho, so my father would take us to dancing. We would act in church plays. I would act in school pantomimes. We would sing, like my sister and I, at different places. I mean, we were constantly doing that sort of stuff. And then I grew and fell in love with rap and started to write poetry as a byproduct of that, because I kind of liked writing songs and things like that. So now I have shed the acting, singing elements of my creativity, and that is not a permanent shedding. I may at some point come back to them. But I write poetry, perform poetry. If you hit me up on my YouTube channel, you should be able to sample some of my poetry there. Or if you hit me up on Instagram, you should be able to sample some of my poetry there. Yes, I play around with musical instruments, kind of. So I started to play the violin when I was 8 years old. There is a long story that goes along with that. If you'd like to hear that story, go on my Instagram and check it out. There you go. Anyway, so I'm one of those people that doesn't believe that limitation lives in the human being. I think we can transcend and continue to transcend barriers, as the Junubi did in getting our independence. Yeah, so even though I have all of those creative interests, I do have 2 law degrees. And I think that my creativity informs my intellect, and my intellect informs my creativity. And I would encourage every Junubi out there listening to me, get engaged with the things that inspire you. And the reason why I say my creativity informs my intellect is sometimes you don't necessarily have to be musical, poetic, or dramatic or anything like that. You can explore your creative side by listening to instrumental music. I would encourage a lot of you to get into like chill music, like chill out music, jazz, the like, and listen to instrumentals just to allow it to as a means of like reflection. Also, I think my Christianity's creeping in. I think gospel music's quite helpful for reflection and otherly ness. And I'm just saying that because what that does is the more your mind is able to engage with the creative elements of itself, the more your intellect is geared towards solution provision. So so that's how I do things. I use one to inform the other and vice versa. So this is an encouragement to all of you. Please get on that bandwagon. But yeah, so yeah, I am the creative intellectual, and I believe that we as human beings have the potential to be creative intellectuals yourselves. So please get on it. If you want to know how I do it, what I do, please hit me up. I'm more than happy to engage, encourage, and give you tips and pointers as to how we can do that. So this has been the Amanda joking. Okay, I'm kidding. But this has been the Alternative Amanda Show in partnership with NAS Radio. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to catching up with you in the next episode. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.